Thank you for downloading this episode of Radio Juxtapoz. My name's Doug, and in this episode we come to you live from the Moniker Art Fair in New York City. This episode is going to be split into two parts, both recorded live at the Moniker Art Fair. Part 1 is going to be a live panel discussion with artist Aaron Lee Hill, the executive director of Urban Nation, Yasha Young, and your very own editor-in-chief of Juxtapoz Magazine, that's right, Evan Pricco. The panel was moderated by myself and really just goes through the ins and outs of the urban contemporary movement. This is going to last for about 30 minutes. Then in part 2, myself and Evan are going to sit down in conversation with the art critic, historian, curator, and just kind of all-round legend that is Carlo McCormick. That man has some serious stories on him. As always, this isn't an episode to be missed. Thank you to Tina from Monica for hosting us for the week. Enjoy the episode. The general idea of what I believe we're talking about is the sort of the rise of urban contemporary. The best place for me to then start that conversation is, what is urban contemporary and how is that in any way different to what street art is?
I personally don't like the name urban contemporary. Is that going to be a problem in this talk?
Yasha?
No, I don't think so. I could give an explanation on what I think it means, but I didn't come up with it. I think people need.
We're off to a good start here.
It's sort of. No, I guess I just like street art. I think it's fine. Like, I don't know why we changed the name. Urban contemporary to me kind of sounds like a condo complex in San Francisco, you know? Like, ooh, the urban contemporary, there's a fucking garden on the top. I don't know, I just thought street art was fine. I don't know why we wanted to change it.
I think that, Evan, you're right. I think this is very interesting that this has come about, but working in an environment that is institutional or for art fairs, and also working with collectors, people need sort of labels. And when you say this is street art and it is in the museum, people say, well, why the fuck does it need to be in a museum? It's street art. So then the explanation started coming about where you had to tell people, well, it is not street art. Street art belongs into the street, but it is actually the natural progression into another genre. And I think this is how this whole urban contemporary, now we have new urban contemporary and we have post-urban now, so this is going to be very interesting because
that's a new one for me.
Yeah, genres go like this, so it's very fast.
Who's making these?
This is interesting. I wouldn't be able to tell you, but it is a rumor. It gets started somewhere. Someone uses a new hashtag, like Evan, and then it gets all over the world used.
Wait, I'm still using street art.
Well, for your work, but not everything that you show is considered street art. There was lowbrow, then there was highbrow, then there was pop surrealism. So it's just me, personally, for me, it's all just art. But I think collectors, places need to put it in genres to be able to have it art historically relevant and recorded and archived.
Do you, Aaron, have a problem being labeled a street artist?
Sometimes I do. I think street art is such a blanket term, and it's really easy to have everything under the sun fit inside of it, and it is literally a whole different gamut. And there's not that much that ties it together besides the fact that it's in the street, and I think sometimes I just want to be called an artist, and it doesn't have to be labeled in one section, and I think it fits into all these different areas that I find really interesting. I find the street one of the most interesting places you can be, but it's a loaded term. It's a very loaded term now. And I think it is interesting to be able to come up with new terms because we're constantly trying to define what it is that we're doing. And I think one of the cool things is that this movement is coming from a lot of people who felt, sick with the way things were going in the established art world or established ways of showing work. And it's trying to kind of like fuse different types of viewing art and creating art together.
Do you think, Yasha, then, the term street art for collectors is kind of like a no-go area? Do you think it puts people off to some extent? And do you think this is the relevancy and importance of having a label like urban contemporary? Do you think that makes it more attractive and more established than street art?
Not necessarily. I think the most important thing to know with all of this is street art belongs into the street. That's what street art is and what it does. But I do believe that if a collector wants to buy something, they look for, most of them look for a label. Others don't. Me personally, I don't. I look for something that I like, or that I see an investment, or that I just want to support. But having it in certain categories helps. And it's, for example, if you look at the last auctions, I think later someone from Bonhams will be speaking here. If you look at all the auctions in the world, people don't do street art auctions. They do urban contemporary auctions now. And I think this is something to do with the feeling that it gives it some sort of relevance and makes it more important in the traditional world. I don't agree with it, though.
Why did you feel there was a need for a museum in this scene?
Well, the reason why I did this was because in my career for the last 25 years, I was a gallerist. I had 3 galleries, one in New York, one in London, one in Berlin. I was the director of a very large art fair in Cologne. And I was always going between worlds, and I was always talking to artists. And artists from that... See, I get music. Yeah. See? I get birds chirping. So I saw that... Tropical
I do. Vibes going on here. Is this powwow?
Probably. I talked to people, and I saw a need for finding a place where they could actually get a backbone, an institutional backbone. Because none of those artists could get into certain galleries because they simply didn't have what was necessary in terms for the blue chip world to get them in those galleries. So I was trying to be an archive, but also in the definition of what a museum has to do. We have to collect, we have to teach, we have to support and archive. So these 4 things I'm trying to do for this genre, or for these artists that are coming about now. So for me, the importance was to create something where people would learn, would grow, where I would give them the opportunity to travel the world, to show at art fairs, be supported by us, to go out and meet collectors, to be all of a sudden in a different range of collectors. I've had Aaron with me quite a lot of times, show them at biannuals, show them where they usually wouldn't get into, but we as an institution can establish ourselves and show the work.
So you guys have worked together, like you said, a couple of times. Shall I ask a question for Evan? I'm going to talk about the residency. I was going to ask maybe if you could explain a little bit about what the thinking was behind this and why you felt that it was needed.
Well, there isn't a residency program out there per se for street artists or graffiti artists or urban contemporary artists, because usually people just don't make it through the very strenuous, very intensive application processes. I think people who come from an art school like in Berlin, the UDK, for example, they get taught in class what's expected from them. Then they become a master student of someone, and then they get to show in a gallery, and then they get to have that resume. I think it's also important that street art is very fast. Graffiti is fast. This art learns to go like this. Yeah? So what I wanted to do is give artists a place where there was a 3 or a 6 month time window. They were fully supported, so they didn't have to worry about work. They didn't have to worry about food, rent, phone, internet, all of this. They had, however, to have a brilliant concept. And the program is extremely mentored. So I have the Minister for Arts and Culture on the jury. I have the Chief Curator of Berlin, who is curating all the museums of Berlin, in the jury. So we had 1,800 submissions, and we only took 40 into closer considerations. And out of those 40s, only 11 make it into the program. It has to be something to do with where do you want to go and how do you want to translate your project into the next level. So you're going to work with me and all the mentors one-on-one every week, 1 hour per artist. You need to learn about writing a text. You need to learn about writing me an essay about your entire exhibition. You need to learn about exhibition architecture. You're going to learn about contracts. You're going to learn about state tax, about shipping and receiving. You're going to learn about all those things that make you at the moment depending on something. Once you graduate this, you're going to have the tools to be emancipated and go ahead and do your own thing and know a little bit more about how that big wheel of art works.
As an artist, is that a side of things that you had ever sort of factored in the reality of all the things that Yasha's just mentioned? You were like, oh, okay, I want to paint, I want to create, and then you're like, oh, geez, shit, there's like a whole thing. I need to know how to sell myself. I need to know how to present myself. I need to know how to pay taxes, things like this.
I mean, that's one of the biggest struggles as an artist. All you want to do is just work, but there's a million other things that are involved with being an artist, and it's almost like 75% admin and bullshit that you got to deal with before you actually get to create the artwork. And I mean, yeah, there's a million different things that factor in. To be able to have that moment to like let everything else in your life kind of dissolve away and to just focus on the painting. And literally to like wake up out of your bed and walk into a beautiful studio, and then like just upstairs is a really good friend of yours. I mean, that to me was the greatest part of the residency program, was that all of us are like a disparate family, that we love each other so much and we find these kindred spirits, but we all live in total different parts of the world. And this was an opportunity for all of us to be near each other and to develop ideas. Like, I actually had some of the best, most productive conversations about my work through that.
I'm just going to bring you in a second because I've realized you've not said anything in ages. Where does print sit in today's world?
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm taking a different place, but you are, Juxtapoz is still a physical publication. You have a huge presence online, but you are still knocking out quarterly magazines. What's the need for that, and is this something that you see kind of continuing on into the future?
Yeah, I think with art, especially if you're focusing on your magazine's attention on the art world, I think inherently there's a collectability. There's always a collectability to art, and I think publications kind of lend itself to being collectible. So I think if you're like covering sports, or if you're covering like topical news, like that's not, you don't really collect those things. So I think for Juxtapoz, we're lucky that, although we do have like a big web presence and a big social media presence, that the actual physical publication fits into the lexicon of collecting and owning something and storytelling, that I think we have an advantage because we're not covering kind of blasé topics, really.
How does that work for you then? Because you have this process. You do something online and it's like, boom, I'm here, I'm doing this, this is this thing that's happening now. And then when you're doing a magazine, you're like, okay, cool, I'm covering this story, but the people aren't going to see this for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year, or something like that. How do you approach that?
Well, that's a good question. You didn't prep me on this question, by the way. No, I mean, I think what you try to do is you try to define a period of time, or you try to define an era as best you can from what you see and what your editors are seeing on the street, per se. I think though the web coverage, the internet is lovely. When you tell somebody you're going to do something with them in print, something feels permanent about that. Even though the internet is permanent, it's just there's something about print that everybody sort of feels like, okay, this feels real, this feels solid, this feels like I'm going to be put into the history books in some sort of way. So I just think now that we're a quarterly, I think we're just really focused on trying to define the era that we're in as best we can.
Do you feel a pressure then to
absolutely
to kind of maintain a relevancy in that respect?
Yeah, I'm fucking getting gray hairs over this shit constantly. No, we do. I think all of us feel a responsibility to get it right, and to cover the right people, and hopefully that they blossom and do great things. You don't want to, be the deterrent to their career, but you know what I mean? No, I think there's tremendous pressure to get it right, and I think that's what I like about being sort of an outsider publication. That's not we're not a bunch of like PhD students who have this preconceived idea of how the fucking art world's supposed to be. We have like a pretty organic way of looking at it, and I think that actually we feel a lot more pressure to get it right as opposed to sort of by the book blueprint. Oh, give it to me.
Oh, she's in.
No, I actually wanted to say something very nice, because I remember that you also have a history that's worth collecting. So your brand and this magazine is built on something that was quite groundbreaking many, many years ago. I remember Billy Shire was running it at La Luz de Jesus, and all these people, they really brought out amazing articles
and still doing a great job.
And brought insights, and you had, at one point, you had a collectible, you had a poster inside. I remember the first time Mark Ryden was on the cover, there was a little poster in it that I still have. So for me, it was a collectible from day one, not only because I followed that particular genre, but also because it was really nicely done. And I think that history gives a lot of credit to the magazine to today.
And you know what? It's actually, not to hijack the conversation, but like street art was like a second wave for Juxtapoz. Because by the time that we really started to focus on street art, like 2004, 5, 6, it sort of was like the new kind of underground scene that was making waves, and we had already covered the pop surreal and the poster art and all that kind of stuff. So street art kind of gave us a little bit of a rebirth and sort of allowed us to become a little bit more international, which I don't think we would have done as easily had street art not taken off.
Going into... Oh, were you going to go?
I was just going to ask, do you feel like you perpetuated that?
I like to think we might have. Like, that's great. That would be really... I would love that to be one of our legacies. That'd be really great. Like, if we helped perpetuate that story, or at least we're like one of the first people to tell that story.
What was the biggest turning point in this story for urban contemporary? What for you brought this into something that was suddenly relevant?
For me personally, that's a loaded question because that's a very, very big question. But I think it started when it became when it made the transition into the commercial spaces. When it was picked up not only commercially but also visually by the press. So of course, 2001, Banksy, Lazaridis, Outsiders had a big impact on that. So once it started making the transition into something that was tangible, that everybody could see right there, that's when it kind of, the wheel started going. Before you saw it on the street, it was people who knew about it or people who had friends who went out to see things, but then it became something that you went to a gallery and you could see something. And then the internet came and then you could do research. And then it started to turn a little bit more, I think.
To me, it was exit for the gift shop. Exit to the gift shop.
Exit through the gift shop.
Exit to the gift. Yeah. Yeah. That to me was the turning point because I think it kind of it brought it into a world that I never thought it would. I never thought it was going to be Academy Award nominated kind of storytelling. I just thought that was sort of the. This is gonna keep going, and it's gonna get bigger. And Banksy sort of drew a little bit of a line in the sand of like what comes before and what comes after. I think with that film, so that to me has always sort of been the kind of like the apex of it. Yeah.
Of a new generation, though, because we had that in the 80s. Let's not forget, we had a gallery wave in the 80s with graffiti artists and all of this being in the gallery. So that was kind of blowing up, and then it kind of went back down because there was a lot of sellout going on, prices exploded. Almost what we see today. There's a great danger into the popularity that comes with a genre. So this was a second coming of somebody who was also being very political and very outspoken. I agree with you, that movie had a big impact also for the mainstream. In the art world, it was kind of a wave. And this wave is very interesting, but also very endangered.
What was it that made you want to go out in the street?
It was the first thing that made me want to go out on the street was seeing, I think, like some of my older friends do graffiti. And actually, no, that's a lie. The first time was a skateboard shop in Toronto called Spaz. And they took me to a Keith Haring exhibit when I was 13. And they taught me my first tag, and I became obsessed with it. And I put it aside for maybe like a year because I got really into skateboarding, and then through that I got more into graffiti. And the more I got into it, the more it had this like weird connection to your environment that was actually similar to skateboarding because you see everything around you in a bit of a different light, and that became such an interesting way to navigate the environment because it was no longer like, oh, I'm just looking at a bus stop, or no, I'm just looking at a mailbox. It was like, this is a canvas, this is a canvas, this is like a harder and harder spot. And it gained you more and more respect, and it gained you more and more like just like imagination and challenge. Like, how can you integrate this thing or deal with it?
Yeah, it's funny. Skateboarding is a big part of all this.
Huge part of it. And I find that such an interesting piece in all of it.
Yeah, and I feel like we don't talk about that enough because skateboarding was like the first sort of youth culture movement that was about turning the city into your own world.
Exactly, yeah.
And to that extent, it graffiti and street art kind of blossoms with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You share an office space.
Yeah, we share. I mean, Juxtapoz and Thrasher are owned by the same people, so I mean,
So you get to see the cross culture.
Yeah, I mean, and skateboarding now is like the biggest sport in the world. I mean, it really is. Like more kids do skateboarding than probably play baseball. I mean, I don't know. I assume.
Real fact.
Huge basement.
I just made that up, but it felt good, didn't it? Huge
basement.
Felt great. You had at least half.
I had to bring up sports somehow in this chat. I made Doug watch basketball last night. For a Scottish man, he held on really well.
How do you get young collectors interested in this? How do you make this appealing for young collectors?
Oh, well,
Wait, this is good because the
This
other
is-
person who was supposed to be on the panel, who went to band practice and said, "Heyo." Some people know what that means. I love you, Jonathan. I was kind of curious what he was going to say about this. That's not mean.
no, I mean, I don't think it's the young collectors that we have to get to it. I think there's a whole lot of young collectors out there. I think it's the tricky part in my line of work, in what I do, is I'm trying to raise interest from the established collections. So I'm trying to get established collectors, established institutions that collect, galleries, also foundations, interested in that kind of work and carefully lead them to understand what it is. You know, the young people that are coming to the museum, they all want to buy something. They want to buy a hat, a shirt, a print, and this and that. Print buying is like buying the new sneaker. That's what it is, you know. But I think the interesting part is to help urban contemporary street art graffiti artists make a transition that is beneficial to their career and has some longevity, is to bring that work into environments where they necessarily are not aware of it yet. There was a man here today, he's a very, very important collector from New York, and I was surprised to see him there. And I would usually only meet him at Frieze. And I ran into him first thing I walked through the door, and I said to him, well, what are you doing here? And he said, well, I'm going to check out the new stuff. So the interesting process is, for a person like this is new stuff. This is something new. For us, it's nothing new. So we have to start a language and a conversation that we explain history to them and lead them to it, and then enable the artist to be relevant in relevant collections.
I mean, go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious, what in the beginning got you to want to bring these artists to that level, to have careers that have that longevity?
Because I love art, and I simply don't believe just because someone didn't go to art school, or someone doesn't have a pedigree, or someone doesn't have the money to further their own career, they should not be considered an artist, and that's a fact. I'm appalled at the fact that somebody would get more attention because they went to a certain school. I can't have that.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it, and I personally, my career is very, very different from any other career of the peers that I see as institutional leaders, and the biggest critique that all those institutional leaders have about me is that I never ever went to study in Harvard, Yale, Brown, or Berlin and finished with a master's degree in museology.
Do you feel like an outsider when you're in those circles? When you're standing there in the bar, do you feel as an urban contemporary, without the urban,
I don't
do you
know,
feel an outsider?
You know what's weird about that is that the biggest art projects that have happened in the last 6 months are all public art, street art projects. Like JR doing the
JR's
Louvre, Cause floating a big fucking inflatable during Art Basel, Hong Kong. Banksy, they're the biggest names. Shepard Fair, they're the biggest names in art. Look, I saw a bunch of kids today taking photos and selfies in front of really, really bad street art with their Supreme bags in their hand. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? That shit's awesome. Because they're going to get a little bit more interested in it, and it's going to be a domino that's going to fall. They're going to start collecting. Maybe they'll buy a print. Maybe they'll, and they'll just continue to have a life looking into the art world. And so if street art is going to be the seed, that's great.
But to get to your question about feeling like an
the
outsider,
question that I asked you, Yasha.
I don't think I feel like an outsider because I am an adventurer. I'm a collector in general. I collect things, and when I was a gallery owner, I attended as a gallery owner art fairs. When I was an art fair director, I worked with galleries and artists to get them into art fairs. When I was a managing director for a big collection for a bank, I worked with people who just bought for investment reason, portfolios, and build that up. So I was very, very fortunate to travel all the circles, so I don't feel like an outsider, and I don't think any person in this genre or anyone here should ever feel like an outsider when they're standing next to Gagosian. As a matter of fact, you just should feel proud because you're the next generation and they're jonesing for you. They just don't know you.
No, I think it's fine being an outsider though too. Like who cares if those people don't? Yeah, who gives a shit?
Aaron, do you want
It's
to pick
the
up on
same
that?
as the labels, not outsiders.
Anything you want to say on that one, Aaron? Have you ever felt in any way that same thing? As a street artist.
Well, I'd say like my background is a little bit different because I went to art school and I did street art, so it's like I feel like I'm walking that line a little bit. But I always feel like whenever I'm in those type of fairs, I just have a moment where I think to myself like I want to put that artist on the corner of a street and give him a giant wall, or throw him in the middle of the night, and it's like, can you do something that's decent under that kind of pressure? And I feel like that's the true beauty within street art that doesn't really get appreciated by a lot of people, is that you got to battle the elements, you got to battle the things that are around you and deal with the environment, and that's one of the most enjoyable parts of it.
Do you think in any way that there is a class problem with this becoming more established into urban contemporary? Do you think there's still the accessibility that there once was for people from different backgrounds?
Is that there's a huge shift. There's a huge shift that is beneficial momentarily. I'm not quite sure if it's going to be beneficial for the galleries, because artists sometimes think they do not need the gallery because they do all the promotion through Instagram and they have their own shows and whatnot. This is a danger. You need the whole infrastructure. And when artists that work in the studio go out, paint on the walls, they take a lot more time. But now walls can be, you can have a wall for 12 days, for 14 days, so there's no rush. Very different. And then there's artists who paint foremost on the street, and they have gotten used to be very quick. Very, very quick, very fast, and they transition that onto the canvas, and sometimes that doesn't work. So there's work to be done on both sides, and it's an interesting transition time.
Where does the gallery sit in today's world?
No, I was going to ask you.
Oh, okay.
I was going to ask him that same question. Like, is a gallery world? Sorry, I didn't mean to ask questions.
One mind.
Yeah, is the gallery world important to you still? Do you need it as much?
It still matters to me because I want to see my career with longevity involved. I want to be able to do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And like you said, it is a symbiotic relationship in the sense that, like, I've done my own shows. It is fucking exhausting. It is so much goddamn work. And it's like just making the artwork is half the battle. I mean, my problem is feeling like the gallery it's giving me so little nowadays. The relationship doesn't feel as 50-50. It doesn't. I feel like I'm putting in a lot more half the time, but I know that it does still matter a lot. And I'm still holding out for a gallery where I feel like they have my back, that they're with me the full way. That even if, let's say, I don't sell that much in this one show, that they want to keep showing me and that they want to promote me and have like a real relationship with me instead of just like one off. Give me a 12 by 12 inch painting every 5 months.
What is it you want from a gallery?
I want. Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good question.
I want the kind of support that I grew up learning about, which is that they helped promote you, they helped manage what you're doing, they helped give you a vision as to like where you're going, and curate the show, help
have collectors.
Have collectors. Like, half the gallerists now ask me for my collector list. It's like, how is that supposed to work out for a 50% fee? It's like, I can just sell it from my studio. Where's the value in all of that? I know a storefront costs a lot of money, and I know the retail space, physical space matters, but it's like, I don't know. This is where Instagram comes into play, and it completely flips the whole scenario, because now the visual space is like, there's
digital.
It's digital, and obviously the eyes in a physical space isn't the same as a digital space.
But I understand what you're saying, and I agree, but it's a very, very, very thin line you have to walk. Because an artist has 150,000 followers. Who is that demographic? But sometimes they think, I have 150,000 followers, and I'm going to be famous. The gallery has 10,000, but who are these 10,000?
This is like an awkwardly weird Radio Juxtapoz broadcast live from a dungeon.
Oh, I'm going to hype it up way more than that. This is a one-off special chance for us to do something completely off the cuff. We are sat in a basement dungeon in Manhattan, and the basement floor of whatever this venue usually is for the Moniker Art Fair.
It's kind of a pop-up space in general. The last thing they had here, which ran for 6 months, was the Velvet Underground experience, which was like put together by French people. In this room, I saw like some good bands down here during that time.
Someone told me it was an American Apparel at one point too.
Could be.
This is perfect. That's a good way to start because
We're going to get stories already.
We have Mr. New York.
I was hoping you were going to do the intro because there's accolades in there that I'm going to end up missing off. So you can take it away on that one.
We have writer, critic, historian, curator. I don't know. What else do you want to add to that?
That's good enough.
It's good enough. Carlo McCormick is on the Radio Juxtapoz podcast today.
Pleasure to be here.
So, he has the tidbits. He knows the history. He knows the neighborhood.
And we're in it. We're in your city right here. So
in your neighborhood.
I'm hoping we can just kind of probe into that a little bit over the period of the next however long we're sat here.
We're fundamentally a block away from my neighborhood, which gets named, the best to my knowledge, is the East Village, when Robert Rauschenberg and also Jasper done the same, but Bob Rauschenberg decides to move to 4th and Lafayette, something like that. I can't remember the exact address. And so the papers reported on it like this migration, like from the...
So what year would this have been?
This would be the 50s.
Okay.
And they're reporting on this kind of move from west to east, and they call it the East Village. So it actually was kind of like artists in a way. Then, of course, it's all about real estate in the end.
Right. But, so... give us a little bit of what this neighborhood would have been like in, say, 78, 77.
Well, I mean, all of New York was a wreck. This wasn't the worst. Broadway kept most of its stores going to some degree. It was, low-end schmata. But, we're at an art fair, so it hasn't really changed much.
But at the same time changed quite a bit.
Yes, it's changed quite a bit. It always does. But, my kid goes to school something like 4 blocks from here, and that school's been there for a really long time, like well over a century,
I mean, your name is definitely one that seems to be synonymous with the New York art scene.
Yes.
But you're not born and bred here?
I wasn't born here.
But you were bred here?
Yeah.
So originally from...
Actually, in New York, it's unleavened bread. Yeah, sorry.
So what brought you here originally?
My parents. I mean,
Okay.
That was simple enough.
Downtown would be just because my mom was on the Upper East Side, and I didn't really people kind of cross the streets to avoid me. So I thought it'd be better to go downtown where I have to cross streets to avoid other people. It was just I'd rather be scared of other people than have sweet old ladies frightened and kind of crossing the street to avoid me.
And this was the epicenter. There was stuff happening down here. There was
downtown has this great history. And,
right.
And it was a great time.
Yeah.
But, not to over-glamorize it, it was a shitty time also.
When you first started writing about, let's say, outsider art.
Okay, that's a good word for it.
What were your other maybe contemporaries interested in at the time? Were you kind of a rare bird in that way, that you were kind of focusing maybe on some alternative movements as opposed to...
No, because there was a great tradition in New York of always these slightly off-the-wall writers. I mean, probably going back at least to Frank O'Hara, the poet, did a lot of art writing, and definitely a little off the mainstream consensus, but my immediate predecessors was a great generation, like Glenn O'Brien and Cookie Mueller and Edith Dayak. These, but I was sort of like, compared to them, I didn't do as much drugs. It was like totally like, it was a diluted generation coming up, and I was a full-fledged drug addict, but I kept my shit together.
So it wasn't for lack of trying.
Yeah. René Ricard, did I mention him? I mean, these people were fucking freaks, and this is kind of what I loved about art criticism was we were all a bunch of incredible losers, absolute failures in life and in every way. We didn't have the scholarship chops to be academics. We couldn't make a living any other way, and this was hardly a living. I mean, that's why I had poets writing for it, like John Ashbery and stuff, because like $50 was a lot of money to a poet. But like that would be the only thing lower than us on the food chain.
Were you embedded with like artists at that point too? Was it
Yeah.
just all one big
Yeah, I
scene?
mean, that
There
would be
was,
the
like,
thing.
no-
Like, I would, for people who want to curate or want to do criticism, I've always thought it's more interesting to find your own group instead of like going at it, coming at it with a theory first and then trying to find artists to match. It's like, chances are if you hang out with artists and spend a lot of time with a lot of different artists, you're going to end up with an interesting perspective on the zeitgeist.
I was just going to ask, did you ever actually participate in the art, or was it the theories on the other side of the
I never
the
made
machine?
art. Yeah, no. Nor did I have any desire. I even took a bunch of LSD to like question myself, to like do the full deep interrogations, like to make sure I wasn't like a frustrated artist or a frustrated novelist. And it's like the thing is I actually wanted to be an art critic, and it's kind of great because if you aim really low, you get your dream.
There you go, kids.
No,
Words of
that's-
advice
that's-
already off the top.
What was the gateway drug?
The gateway what?
The gateway drug into this scene.
Well, I mean, it sounds like there was quite a few.
Oh yeah,
But
I was a garbage head. I did them all. I'll
no,
tell you.
in terms of
Okay,
in
I'll
terms
tell
of
you
what
what
got you into
in
the
terms
art
of
scene
people or
itself.
shows or events or
okay,
something.
but let's stay on the drugs for
We
one.
can keep
one
doing
more
that.
second.
We can talk
That
about
sounds
I
it.
will tell you that the peak years of my writing career, shambles that it is, was when I was a kid, like my 20s. I was writing for Art Forum for a very long time. And in that time, I was a horrible, like you would have fucking crossed the street to avoid me, speed freak. Like really gnarly. And so the kind of verbiage that piles up in those situations was kind of perfect for to have Donald Cuspit and Tom McEvely as my workmates there. It was like kind of like, as well as Edit and Renee and all those people like that. It was like, yes, it worked good. Gateway shows. I guess for me, probably the first time, because I was going to shows since I was a kid. I kind of grew up going to galleries and museums and stuff
the
like that.
advantage of living in Manhattan.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Or being really weird also.
Yeah, okay,
Because
perfect.
it wasn't like, I went to a show every now and then. Like, I went every day I could because
And
it
you
was,
still kind of do.
Yeah, I probably don't have the attendance record I did when I was a kid, but and then I was more, you're more an observer than a participant. At a certain point, you become a participant. So I guess a gateway show for me would be like the Times Square show, 1980, Collab put together. You know about that show?
No.
Oh, it's a pretty hip one. So in basically New Year's Eve, 1979, turning into 1980, Collab, which stood for Collaborative Projects, which is basically a bunch of mad artists, like kind of political, socially engaged, kind of teaming together because it's easier to, there's still government funding for the arts. It's easier to do it as an umbrella organization. They tell me I rewrite that because they never got many grants, but I'm sticking with my version of their history. But they took over this abandoned building and did the real estate show. And the city shut it down the next day, and it was front page of the papers, and Joseph Beuys was outside, protesting it, and the city was so shamed they gave Collab this building, which became ABC No Rio quickly and has a long history as a radical alternative space. But that summer of 1980, Collab decides to do a really big show in Times Square in an abandoned massage parlor, which they rented through, I think it was Mimi Gross hooked it up. She was married to Red Grooms at the time. And so it's the core Collab people, like Kiki Smith, Tom Otterness, Jane Dixon, Charlie Ahern, John Ahern, tons.
Names.
Walter
like,
Robinson, really cool people.
Yeah.
I think Jenny Holzer, anyway, a lot of interesting stuff. And then all these other people, because everyone was paying attention to Collab's last show, even though it lasted for 4 hours or something before the cops barricaded this abandoned building because it was unsafe for people to be in there. It drew a lot of other people, so like David Hammonds, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Fab Five Freddy and Lee Quinones did a mural outside. So this would be like a gateway show where it's like, hold on, it's not all these like uptown galleries I'm going to. Like, that's why I want to be downtown.
Do you still see that energy?
Well, it's probably, there's still energy there. It's just different, and channeled in different directions. People probably don't look up from their screens enough to do what we had going, but otherwise, yeah, there's still energy there. I mean, if you're a 20-year-old kid or whatever, like I was younger, but like if you're that age, like you've got energy, you've got so much energy, you've got to take drugs.
What is it then that's the big contributing factor to the difference in this? Because I think youth culture will still always be energized to do something, and if you're not seeing it here, is that because it's not happening necessarily here, or is it that it's just taking a different shape and it's manifesting into a different pocket of subculture?
Yeah, I think things take different shapes. I think you got to be wary as you get older, because I got a lot of grumpy old friends, people who make me look like Pollyanna optimist. But you just have to be wary, because a lot of what you're missing is being young yourself. And as far as I can tell, the kids are still having fun, and maybe not as transgressive or nihilistic as my generation was. Punk was a big part of it, and then early hip hop. These were like kind of defining things for our generation, but they were like, it's a different energy.
Is this like maybe an attitude in them being more aware of what this can achieve, or like what they can get from this, from being maybe more career focused, maybe being smarter with how they're presenting themselves and working do you think that they're maybe more focused into something that wasn't part of the conversation 30 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think post-war America enjoyed a period of time where you could live cheaply and not worry about money. Like, the Beats started doing it in the 50s, and you're in the Bay Area, so you had like all the funk artists. You had a lot of crazy Semina culture down in LA, and then like there was the 60s, and then there was
a luxury in winning that war, because where we sort of had this kind of moment.
In New York, rents were so cheap, and I remember being recorded much like this when I was just a kid, and it was by Irving Sandler, the great historian who wrote the book The New York School, and he was like, puts on the tape recorder. I'll tell you about tape recorders sometime. But and he said my name, and then he goes like, "So why are you like in the East Village?" And like he starts with that, and I go like, "Oh, because it's the only place I can afford." And he goes, "How much rent do you pay?" And I was like, "I don't know, probably it was like $150." And he goes, because I remember when Jackson Pollock lived there, he was paying $15 a month, and that was just but it was the same economy in that you could pick up some gig and enough to, you didn't have to sell your soul working full time, which is the thing which is you're going to give away the best years of your life. You could still afford to do that. And as kids are under different pressures now, or we're also seeing a big shift in the demographics of artists, which have always kind of come from a certain class level, but right now more and more often it's rich kids who can afford to live in New York because their parents are helping them. A lot of these things like that. It's just, that's a factor of it.
Was there like a period of time when, like you would be talking to people and they would mention Jackson Pollock, or you would see Andy Warhol somewhere, that you ever felt, I don't know if starstruck is the right word, but did you ever, was there ever a moment where you're like, oh, this is kind of like, I feel like I'm entering into something that's...
In terms of gestures of respect, I've met artists who've become really good friends, but I think I might have gotten on my knees and bowed before them when I met them, but I was never actually starstruck. That was, I was partly punk also.
Yeah.
But I mean,
because I know you've met so many pivotal people. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I know a lot of people from my generation, but the great thing about New York then was it had not become so homogenized, so we still had like all these it was multi-generational with old freaks.
Yeah.
So we had like Allen Ginsberg and Herbert Huncke and Gregory Corso and Taylor Mead and of course Jackson was dead before I was sentient, but I knew the girl who was blowing him in the car. Ruth Kligman was her name. She found Jesus afterwards. But great artist and totally forgotten.
But I guess like the artist as celebrity wasn't really that big of a thing as it is now.
Well, I mean, I think Jackson Pollock was a huge.
Well, he'd be.
Yeah, but still, like our notion of it's pretty marginal. I mean,
You write about this a lot. I write about the culture a lot, or various cultures a lot. Do you, having experienced that period, do you feel that nostalgia is something that you have to work to disconnect yourself from, or does it often overbear, the tone of voice in which you're talking?
I think nostalgia is really toxic, and it's like.
And I feel like it's hard in New York not to have nostalgia because there's such.
New York's haunted that way.
Yeah.
My old joke is, whenever you arrive in New York, you just missed it. If you'd only been here 15 minutes ago, it's so much fucking better. So I mean. Whatever it was, even if my time's become, right now there's a fetish for New York of the 80s, which is good for me. It's better if you have a few friends who got really, really famous who are dead, so you're the one forced to speak about them. There's a lot of memories, and also tonight, this is so good I can say these things because people will be hearing this months later. So,
do you see a difference then in attitude from the young creators now?
They're probably a little nicer than we were. We were a bunch of assholes.
Do you think that I detected there's quite a lot of truth in what you're saying? I don't think you're joking. I think it's said with a tone of joke, but I think you're probably.
I used to kick
He said it with a smile, but there was definitely some sinisterism to that. Seeing the earliest stages of graffiti and street art, are you surprised it's still?
Yeah, I think
happening because it is. It's like it's still.
Well, it seemed like it. It did seem life-changing at the time, but I don't think any. I mean, I've got enough contemporaries. We compare notes, and some people pretend a little more prescience than others. But basically, all of us are pretty flummoxed that this became a global language of youth culture by which kids who can't even speak the same language are still talking to each other across incredible distances. It's like really kind of. Amazing.
Did you feel that at the time, or was it something that came?
No, that it would go
after?
global like that. I thought, maybe I thought we'd go global, but I didn't think everyone else would do it.
But that's actually kind of an interesting tidbit because it feels like New York has always been the center of the art world. So you would think that the movement that was kind of happening here would go global just by that nature, but
yeah, I mean that's why everyone lived in this really, really shitty fucking place. Also, it wasn't just because it was cheap to live there; it's because you put up with the greatest indignities possible just to be on that stage.
Right.
But a lot of things changed in the '80s, and one of them was that a new kind of cult of youth emerged because of people like Herring and Basquiat and Kenny Scharf and whatever. All these people. It used to be kind of like. You showed your work to a gallery, they'd be like, "Oh, this is really good. This is really interesting. Let's look at it again in a year, see how you're going." It wasn't like this mad dash for that. Painting wasn't very popular. I mean, New York has a great time in my mind in the '60s with conceptual art, but then and minimalism too. Though we were rebelling against that for sure. There was a lot of people trying to paint when painting was dead. There was a lot. It was a really frustrated place with a lot of great artists, not that many of whom are that known. So the stakes really changed in the '80s with a kind of huge art boom, which pulls in a lot of people I don't particularly care about. It pulls in like David Sally and Eric Fischel and Julian Schnabel and people like with egos who's trying to see who can piss further or something like that. there were animosities, and there was certainly a fair amount of competition. Like, not everyone, there was, and their jealousies and stuff like that. But it was a really supportive community, and it was one that was like so shoestring that no one had any safety net. So if somebody got sick, or something, their place burnt down or whatever, benefits happened. And sometimes it it's kind of like house parties. If you couldn't pay your rent, you threw a party and everyone kind of just chipped in. So that was pretty good lesson for me in generosity, because deep at heart I'm a stingy bastard. But that was because I was in jail in Mexico, and that was a community just fucking coming to bail my ass.
I've got to ask.
Yeah, wait.
Got to ask. What put you there? What took you into
I
that
thought it'd be
situation?
a good story.
Yeah.
Is this going back to the original question of what's the gateway drug?
It was a gateway drug. I was down. I was trying to work on a story for Art Forum about the Huicholi Indians, who do beautiful yarn paintings and are indigenous, but peyoteros. They eat peyote for their visions. And so I was with the shaman and basically truckfuls of peyote, which was for the whole village. It's because it's a long way between them and their medicine. So I went for the harvest and that. And so I got basically accused of smuggling kilos of peyote. It's one of the few times I actually was innocent.
Okay. No, speaking of psychedelics and peyote.
Maybe it's yourself, but it feels like that time that there was an element of pushing limits. Was there ever a point where you felt that you had crossed that limit of where you were willing to push it and you actually thought, shit, we've gone too far on this one?
For me, I guess, it's this moral compass things. No matter how bad you get, you don't steal from friends, fundamental stuff. Yeah. So I never crossed any lines just because I guess I have either internally or was raised to be a good boy, things like that. We were pretty freewheeling, as long as you didn't molest children or practice cannibalism. I mean, we had some taboos, but
there was a limit.
One of the guys who was very beloved in New York was Allen Ginsberg. I mean, he's an uncle to so many of us, and he was a proud card-carrying member of NAMBLA. I knew a lot of his boyfriends because they were too young to drink when we weren't IDing people, and I would still get them drinks. But that's the other thing I should say, is that part of my engagement all these years was that I worked in nightclubs and bars and places like that. So it was it was the only way to subsidize myself as a writer. But it was an incredible. So much of this stuff, so much of the economy was based in nightlife then. This is where people went to find work, or if you had a gig and you needed people to help you on it, to find them, and they whatever, and they would tell you what you were doing the rest of the week. And a lot of the artists I mentioned were people who were. This was we all lived in shitty tenements. We didn't want to spend 1 minute there fucking swatting cockroaches off our body all night. So we went out every fucking night.
Because this is the Radio Juxtapoz podcast.
Oh, do I have to stop using swear words?
No, it's perfect.
Oh, okay.
You've always been connected to the alternative outsider stuff on the West Coast, even though you've lived your whole life here. When did that kind of Robert Crumb, Robert Williams, West Coast vibe come to New York, and was it embraced in
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
No. Crumb doesn't get embraced until he's fully ratified and with David Zwirner, and even then his last show was wow, man, you are pulling off a really misogynist male gaze at a time where that's hard to pull off.
Right.
But you are with Zwirner, and you're kind of the archetype.
Psychedelic Solutions would have been the first place.
That's where I got all my education. So not just on the comic guys, because he showed all the Zap people, Spain and Wilson and Robert and. But then he also showed all the poster artists. Right. So
when
Mouse
would that have been?
And Kelly and what?
When would this have been? 80s? Early 90s?
I guess late 80s. And I was, it was fun. I got to write about a lot of that stuff for Art Forum. So it was really cool, that I could do that for these people. And I'm still, I'm not just about street art. I got a lot of weird little cul-de-sacs, which are all about equally worthless. Street art's probably the one with the biggest boil, but it's still pretty marginal to the real art world. Right. But psychedelia, I've always been a big supporter of, and I was, really almost as life changed in the '90s with the kind of urban, its navigation of spaces with street skating. Mm-hmm. And that was like, because that was a whole new way of seeing the city. And they were also creative because the process of skating was so creative. So at the same time, I'm working at Max Fish. This kid, Aaron Rose, opens up a Legend Gallery. And that's right next door. And we become like basically living rooms of one another. And so all those guys,
that beautiful loser scene,
exactly.
So, which kind of combined the West and East Coast in a way that was really fascinating.
It was really great, and they were all, it was people like Mike Mills, who was like clearly like he just wanted to make movies, but he was gonna like figure out a way to sustain himself until they could get a feature made. There was a lot, or Spike Jonze. All these people were part of it as well. So it was like a very mediated generation. It was really different than mine, and. But I was really really fortunate to meet those people then, and that kept me sustained at a time when I think I was pretty alienated from the art. I mean, I've had a bunch of periods where I just I can't, please keep me away from that shit. But I've been in it so long, so it's nice when there's a different generation, generally a younger one, that can help you reinvent your passions.
I always thought that the kind of funny little era of mid '90s, where the Beastie Boys were having a Bruce Davidson photo on their cover with an Alex Gray painting in the middle of the album, and then that whole thing where just there's so many cultures just swirling together. But it was here that it was happening.
Yeah. In a way, I think the Beastie Boys were probably living in LA then, but
yeah, I think they were.
You mentioned you got your toe dipped in other cultures. Does fandomania mean anything to you?
Fandomania?
Yeah.
I wrote a book called Fandomania.
Yeah. Can you maybe explain what that was about and how you got involved in this?
How did you find out about that one? That was actually the worst selling book I ever did. And also, for the publisher, which is a very prestigious publisher, Aperture, one of the great photo book publishers, probably the worst book they ever did. But I was they pulled the trigger on that, and then I got to write it. But this woman had been going around and documenting, really the start. It was a book before its time, but she'd been documenting cosplay. And cosplay, it's like Pokemon, Pocket Monster, right? It's like a Japanese shortening. I think everyone knows what cosplay is by now, though, right? Yeah, it's costume play. And that was really revelatory to me. A little cringy, but so interesting to see. It was the beginning of my awareness that there was a new fluidity entering identity that was unfathomable to me. That people with not idealized body types, certainly not the kinds you would get in anime or a video game, were dressing up in tights and being this character. It was really rad.
Is Carlo McCormick for the art world the same as the Carlo McCormick for the cosplay world? Are they the same person?
Yeah, I don't.
The book didn't sell well.
So. The book didn't sell. I would have done another if there was a demand. And I'm sure it's developed so much more. When I go to a Comic-Con or something like that, it's oh my fucking God, these people are freaks. I mean, at that time, it was just
I can see why it maybe didn't sell well.
It was just kind of congealing out of the kind of these weird, I mean, obviously a lot had come over from Japan, but in America, we'd have these weird traditions. Rocky Horror Picture Show, these midnight screenings where everyone dressed up in it. In a way, it's not that different than because there was a lot of freaky kids involved in that stuff. Those kind of Renaissance fairs things.
Yeah.
I mean, those people are really weird. Yeah. I mean, genuinely, they're maybe not as smart as I want them to be, or but whatever. There were Star Trek conventions.
Right.
There was Civil War reenact.
What do you prefer now? You've been curating so much in the last decade.
I'm taking a full year off because it killed me. This last year I did 6 shows in 1 year, and it beat me down. So. But
you there was a transition for you where you were doing so much writing, and then it was you were now a curator, which
it was kind of partly
isn't as sexy as it sounds. But it's interesting.
Part of it was that certain opportunities present themselves, and the certain ideas are And better as a show, and some ones are better as a book, or and some are probably fine on Instagram, But so I got to do some pretty ambitious things with big budgets, and and they were fun. But they burnt me out, and it changes your relationship with artists, because what I do is
I was just gonna ask that.
It's pretty simple. It's like I just spend a bunch of time with somebody. I think about their work a lot. I ask them a bunch of stuff. I listen to what they have to say, and then I write something from the heart, and they can't believe how, they start thinking I'm a good guy. No, I just like their art. I'm really not that good a guy, but it gets a lot more love than it deserves.
The best thing I've ever heard about your writing was when Espo wrote me and said everything Carlo wrote about me was so wrong, but it was so right. I thought that was one of my favorite things ever that anyone's ever said about you. I was like, so good.
That's good.
It was a good line, for sure.
This scene has, and we were talking about this last night, it was like, it's almost hard to separate yourself from the personal connection that you build with people, because it's so interconnected in this. Has that ever been a problem for you when you've either had to write something, whenever you've had to engage with something?
I can't write about people I don't care about, so that's not that much of a problem. I learned that one really early. I would have loved to have been a hack writer that I could just fucking do that stuff, but I just kept fucking up on it. And I fuck up plenty even on the people I care about. But I'm rarely surprised, but usually usually if I like somebody, then I'm like, oh wow, their art's really cool too. That generally that follows. It's pretty rough. Like being a really bad artist is not a deal breaker on friendship, but it doesn't allow me as much proximity as if you're a good artist.
I like that you're honest about that.
Yeah,
But I think it's almost like you don't have time for the shit you don't like.
Yeah, but it's not even about not liking; it's about not caring.
I guess
because we don't have time, and caring is even that's even also got another level of subjectivity, because as a writer, what you're really looking for is something to write about, something that gives you an idea. And there's lots of great art out there that I have nothing original to say about, so I just, why bother writing something obvious or not super insightful? So that's a big deciding factor as well. I mean, I don't hate abstract painting. I just haven't had a lot to say with it. I mean, I knew Clem Greenberg as a kid, and it's like I never knew Harold Rosenberg, but I knew Greenberg and and Irving Sandler, who I mentioned before. I mean, that they'd already determined a language about it, and I never found a language in abstraction that went beyond it. Now, as it adopts, it's interesting. I mean, for street art, it's really great, like Momo or whatever, all these people working in abstraction now. I think Jordan Seiler was talking here yesterday. He works with that as well as the activism, so it's kind of interesting. That's that guy Raphael Schachter is really strong on that shit.
Yeah. I guess it is a good question. Who are some of the artists that kind of your interest gets piqued when you
that are doing it now?
Yeah, doing it
Contemporaries.
now. Kind of
now.
The kind of, let's just say the
quote,
younger generation.
Well, I don't know how much younger they are, but everyone's younger than me, so you're all still jailbait no matter how old you get. But
well, that was creepy.
It's okay.
For now, I mean, okay, it's ridiculous. It's like when people ask me, who's your favorite artist? I have nothing to say. But who's at Moniker, just right now? It's so good to see Eddie's work, WK Interact. I haven't seen it, and that was all stuff I remembered from when he did it. I love that Ganzier's here. He's an amazing artist and totally inspiring to me that, he was a kind of a figurehead of Arab Spring in Egypt, and he's had to escape and live with the Icy and Sot, same deal, from Iran. It's I think there's a lot of really good work just here of the Sherio and Yak, even the projects they pull in. So these are all artists I like. Are they already too known? I don't know, but I can't keep track of everything. I'm just happy that I have a continual feed of art that I'll get to care about. But these are all artists I really respect.
For you to love an artist, do they have to carry a background story? that inspires you? In
No,
any way?
that though I loved when Evan said, "Let's talk about like what you care about, which is outsider art," because I actually wrote a lot about outsider art in the early
Right,
days.
yeah.
But yeah, it's all a little outsider that way. But I do resist that thing because to me, a lot of outsider art is about this kind of narrative. Oh, crazy old black lady, 102 years old with like 107 grandchildren, and she goes in the woods in back of her house, and God points out all these creatures embedded in the like these kind of origin stories about these things, and then it becomes like it risks cultural appropriation, and then you find out that somebody bought out all their work for relatively cheap, and now they're like still alive but dying because they can't afford any meds, so. Well, I'm wary of that aspect in all these worlds.
You were the one who made me feel comfortable using the term outsider art, because we would go to like Andrew Edlin's gallery and these champions of outsider art, and I was always so uncomfortable using the title, but then I was starting to kind of like understand where it could be used and where it's actually appropriate.
It's not everyone, but like in the art world, like I actually probably share outsider art with a few more people than I do graph or street art. So like when the Outsider Fair happens, I'll always see like had the big show at the Guggenheim.
Oh, Maurizio Catalan.
Maurizio Catalan will always be there. Andrea Serrano will always be there. It's like you can just see Cause will always be there.
Yeah, he's a big collector of this scene for sure,
so,
or that scene.
So you can see that it's probably this similar to my ongoing obsession with illicit projects on the street and in public place, but like it's when you're looking at self-taught artists who don't come at it from a lot of other reasons and like something very personal and compulsive. What time is it? 4:45. Okay, I got to end up. Anyway, it's got a level of authenticity we sometimes miss in the Emperor's New Clothes of the art world, and let me shut it down on that.